this all the time, that we remember the case he's made that he actually did win the popular vote.
Right.
That we know that eats at him that he lost that to Hillary Clinton. The Russia probe, yes, it's a threat to his standing in office currently, but more than that, it flies into his insecurity. Right. The idea that there's a sense that he wasn't a legitimate president, that the thought of a foreign influence, well, you wouldn't have won if it wasn't for Moscow. That drives him mad. And I think you see that time and time again, his need to assert, I'm in command, I know what I'm doing, I'm this, as a way to push back against that.
You know, Susan, there was I think it was Josh Dawsey, your colleague at the Washington Post, who tweeted out that he had reached out to senior advisors to the president and asked what they thought about the New York Times interview, to which this one advisor said, New York Times, today? In other words, no one around Trump knew this interview with the New York Times, the nation's leading newspaper, one of the two leading newspapers.
Thank you.
Great, yeah. Was taking place.
Which is absolutely shocking and unbelievable from a communication shop point of view. The fact that the president went on the record for a half hour, set out policy. I mean, he talked about international relationships, domestic. He went after Democrats after talking about bipartisanship. It shows that this is a White House that is still not ready for prime time. This is a president who likes prime time and doesn't care how he's viewed in prime time, but just wants to be there, but is not prepared for the consequences. This is about leading a country right now. And to Joe Scarborough's point in his op-ed today in the Washington Post, next year is critical because we have to have a government that believes in, or a country that believes in our elections, that believes in our government, that believes in our Department of Justice. And this president, in a wide-ranging interview, is willing to trash everyone and everything and just promote himself, not the values of our country. And I think it is very serious times. It's easy to kind of throw it out there like, oh, he just did this interview, but there's some real serious consequences for an interview like this.
I think it's really important that we don't run past the claim that I have the absolute right to do whatever I want to do with the Justice Department.
That's a serious issue.
I don't think any modern president would ever say anything like that. And so there's a combination of not only his insecurities, which we see through I'm loved, they love me, you know, that kind of thing, but it's the combination of his insecurities with his autocratic impulses that are evident in this interview and in the transcripts that should be really, should cause us all to pause and not just simply be excited that he just went on the record for 30 minutes.
There's also been this great tension, you know, in terms of what the White House's approach should be to Mueller. You know, the White House lawyers, yeah, as Schmidt said in the interview, have reassured the president, this is going to be over soon, you're going to be exonerated. But there are people around the president, the Steve Bannons, the other people he talks to outside of the White House who say, look, this is an existential threat to your presidency. You need to hit back. You need to take a more aggressive tone. And to this point, for the most part, the president has listened to the lawyers. He has not gone after Mueller in a direct way. But I think what we saw in this interview is he sort of hinted like, well, I'm at least considering the other option.
Right, but he wouldn't still go quite the far.
Not yet. He's not yet. Not yet. Doesn't mean he won't someday.
Mike Allen, I know you're itching to get in here. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, Willie, one of the great things about this winging it in the grill room interview is it's like eavesdropping in the Oval Office. These rants, and there's no other word for them, advisors say they hear all day, and we see in this why it's so hard for people to bring the president bad news or convince him of reality or things that aren't true, and you see why advisors rise when they tell him what he wants to hear. He wants to be fed, and that's why we see these very repetitious, insistent bits in here, including this idea that, oh, we would have had a bipartisan tax cut if Democrats had just wanted it. That's not how it went down, as your viewers well know.
So one thing that the president clearly didn't seem aware of when he talked to Michael Schmidt yesterday is that the poll numbers show that the American public is not happy with what he's doing. This is a president who obviously wants to be successful, thinks he dominates every day's news feed, thinks that we in the media desperately need him. He needs to look at some poll numbers. He needs to look at some election results. If the president did that, he would see that this very divisive rhetoric does not seem to be what the country wants right now. And maybe, that'd be my hope for 2018, maybe the president gets it, that the public is sick of this super partisan stuff, The president's popularity began to nosedive in February and has stayed pretty much flat down there around 36% support ever since.
Yeah, 36 to 41, depending on the poll you look at, and 70% in the Associated Press poll say we're on the wrong track. Yamiche, I want to underline something that Professor Glaude brought to our attention. This is the New York Times asking President Trump if the Justice Department should reopen the investigation to Hillary Clinton's emails. He said, quote, "I have the absolute right to do what I want to do with the Justice Department," and he's basically not doing it out of the goodness of his heart or because he wants to be treated fairly. There are so many questions that we could ask about that, but just his view of his role in the White House here, sort of encapsulated right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you asked me before, what were the two things that jumped out? I pointed to that quote because I think that that's a quote that in some ways sounds authoritarian. One of the things that I wrote a story last year that interviewing people from authoritarian governments that had grown up with dictators, and they said that they saw a lot of their old leaders in President Trump. American presidents usually do not talk this way, or I should dare say they do not talk this way. They don't say that I can do whatever I want with the Justice Department. And there's also this idea that while he's holding on to Hillary Clinton and continuing to hearken on that, this is also vintage President Trump going back to President Obama saying, well, Eric Holder protected President Obama. And there's in some ways no comparison to be made there. President Obama didn't have this special counsel issue. He didn't have this issue with whether or not his campaign had colluded with a foreign government. And here you have President Trump trying to say, well, I'm just doing what everyone else did, which is false. He's not doing what everyone else did, including this. And I think that the idea that he's saying that is I think he's setting us up for 2018, where if he fires Robert Mueller, we can point back to this quote and say, well, this is where we knew that he was capable of doing this.
All right, Yamiche Alcindor, whose newspaper, the New York Times, landed the grill room interview heard around the world. Thank you very much. Mike Allen will be reading Trump Unchained, an Axios.